Hi guys, my name is Antonio Tabet Insana and my group partner is Andres Perez. The topic of our presentation and the paper that we chose was about wildfires modifying the parasite loads of invasive cane toads. So the main objective of this study was to understand how wildfires influenced the parasite loads in invasive cane toads. So we're more specifically talking about lungworms in this case. So lungworms, they're common parasites in cane toads, which can significantly harm their health as well as their behavior. And so the researchers focus on the following question, which says, do wildfires change rates of infection in cane toads? So their hypothesis, they predicted that fires will actually reduce the infection rates, especially in adult cane toads. All right, so over the last few decades, climate change has caused more frequent and intense wildfires, and so these wildfires, they don't just destroy the habitats. They can also have a big impact towards the parasite populations, including the ones with a free living stage. And so the cane toads, which are invasive in Australia, they carry these lungworms. As I mentioned, these parasites can harm their health as well as their behavior, and they rely on moist environments in order to survive. So this study basically looks and analyzes how wildfires might affect the number of lungworms infecting the cane toads. Alright, so the researchers studied over 570 cane toads from various regions from eastern Australia, which had experienced major wildfires. And so what they did is that they collected data from both the burned and the unburned sites in order to compare. So each toad was measured for body length and sex, and then they were dissected in order to check for the parasites, the lungworm parasites in their lungs. So in regards to the analysis, what they did is that they used different statistical models. So they used a binary model in order to check if the toads were infected or not, and then they used a negative binomial model in order to measure the amount of parasites that each infected toad had. They included the fire condition and the toad size as key elements, and also accounted for differences between the populations by including it as a random factor. To better understand the effect of fire, toads were divided into juveniles and adults. And so they looked at whether the time since the fire had changed the infection rates.
Hello, my name is Andres Perez, and I'm the other student here working on this presentation with Antonio. So, for this first slide, for the findings, so the study looked at how wildfires affected parasite loads in invasive cane toads, specifically lungworms. So, they found that in unburned areas, larger toads were more likely to be infected and had more lungworms. However, in burned areas, the opposite was true, right? So the larger toads had fewer parasites. Interestingly, small toads had similar parasite loads regardless of the fire. So this suggests that maybe the fire may have disrupted the parasite's life cycle, and this can protect the larger toads from infection. And to look at the graph now, so this figure shows that in unburned areas, the larger toads had higher infection rates and more lungworms, which is what makes sense because they've had more time to be exposed. However, in the burned areas, the trend flips, so the larger toads had fewer parasites. So this suggests that the fire killed off parasites and parasites larvae in dry habitats, which is especially like where the bigger toads tend to go. So smaller toads weren't affected as much because they like to stay in the moist areas, which is where parasites can still survive. So overall, the fire seems to have reduced the parasite loads, mainly in the larger toads. So these results suggest that the reduced parasite load in burned areas is likely due to the fire killing off the lungworm larvae, which need the moist environments to survive. So after a fire, the larger toads use the drier, more open spaces, which is where the parasite larvae likely can't survive. So they benefit the most there. So the smaller toads, however, they stay in damper areas near ponds, which is where larvae might still be present. So this shows that the fires can create like a size-dependent impact on the infection of the parasites. In summary, this study found that the intense wildfires lowered parasite loads in large cane toads, but not necessarily in younger ones and juveniles. So the likely cause is that fires reducing the availability of the moist environments needed by parasite larvae. So this means that instead of harming the toads, fire may actually benefit them by weakening their parasite, like their natural parasite like enemy in a way. So this is a clear example of how fire can change not just habitats but also relationships between organisms, like biological relationships. So now is why the study is important. I mean, this study is important because it shows that wildfires, again, don't just affect habitat structure, but they can also influence interactions between different organisms and species, like parasitism in this case. So for invasive species like the cane toad, this could give them an unexpected advantage in a changing climate. So as fires become more frequent and intense, we may see more cases where invaders thrive while native species struggle. So understanding not only the direct effects but also these indirect effects is very critical for conservation and managing invasive species like it is so in this case. So thank you for your attention during this presentation. I hope you guys learned something and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.